Welcome back to module number 4, Against the Current. And in this module, we're going to talk about treading against the current and how that applies to entrepreneurship. It basically means to go against the norm, to not let the river decide your destination, but to fight against the current and to set your own destiny. It means literally to march to the beat of your own drum, as the famous cliche goes. Now, I'm going to practice what I preached in our introduction and actually paraphrase this cliche to represent the model of leadership and entrepreneurship. So here goes. As an entrepreneur, you need to march to the beat of your own dream.
That is such a cool concept, and I see exactly what you mean. We all have different goals and dreams in life, right? So you and I have seen how the most successful entrepreneurs do march to the beat of their own dream, meaning that when they want something, they go for it, and they don't stop until they reach that dream, no matter who or what gets in their way.
Precisely. It comes down to a few essential things, and they are breaking down barriers, paving your own way, not relying on others to succeed, creating opportunities where none exist, refusing to live by the status quo, breaking the mold, never say never, never surrender, not to be confused, of course, with being stubborn and careless, but learning to take calculated risks and learning from your mistakes, and finally, believing in yourself.
It's interesting to note as I look at your list that all of these are a combination of two things: actions and attitude.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree. And I'm glad you mentioned that because those are probably the two prime sources of fuel that can be your driving force when you're trying to do what we're teaching you in this module, to swim against the current. Now, you can visualize that analogy however you want. Maybe you're on a canoe paddling upstream, or you're swimming against the current of a raging river. Does that sound like fun?
Actually, no, it doesn't. It actually sounds very challenging. In fact, wouldn't it be easier to just paddle your canoe downstream and just let the current carry you smoothly across the river?
Well, in theory, yes, but it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? If you're paddling the river to do some sightseeing, then sure, why not? Go with the current. But maybe you're an athlete who's trying to gain some real core body strength. I mean, isn't that what athletes do? Strength and conditioning is done by lifting weight, or in other words, placing resistance against your efforts. So it's up to the athlete to dominate that resistance in order to get stronger. The same principle applies in business and in life. We grow stronger and become better versions of ourselves when we train ourselves to overcome resistance.
Hmm, so true. Can you explain why you believe action and attitude are the biggest driving forces of an entrepreneur and how exactly you're supposed to fight them correctly?
Yes, of course. Let's start with action. Now, I'm going to actually share a couple of quotes that you may be familiar with if you follow 20th century literature. Now, the origin of these philosophies is often debated, but it's really the principles that we're focusing on here. So here's a couple of my favorites. Number one, when you look back on your life, you'll regret the things you didn't do more than the ones you did. This is from Life's Little Instruction Book. It's by H. Jackson Brown Jr., published in 1991. Second, which is also one of my favorites, is this: it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. This is from Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem In Memoriam 27, published way back in 1850. And this one kind of reminds me of the way you and I met and how our first date came about. Do you remember that?
I do actually, and I would love to hear that story again.
Okay, so I'm going to share that story very briefly. It is a very long story, but I'm going to give you the short version of it. The very typical story of a teenage boy having a crush on a teenage girl and just being too shy and too scared to approach her. And Adriana and I actually knew each other indirectly. We had kind of the same circle of friends. Um, but my problem was that I never had the right opportunity, at least not in my mind, where it was like the perfect timing or the perfect place, or where I was able to approach her one on one. And she was always surrounded by her friends, and it was really difficult. Now, I was okay with that. I wasn't really in a hurry, even though I had a crush on her. But what happened is I found out that she was going to be moving and that I was potentially never going to see her again. So obviously, I had to make the decision as to whether I was okay with that, or whether I was willing to take a chance and potentially make something happen. So obviously, I did the latter, and uh, probably a couple of years later is when we ended up taking it seriously and then becoming engaged and married. But it was not easy. I actually had to not only approach her in a very awkward and uncomfortable situation, but being surrounded, we were actually in a car full of friends, and I had to not only ask her out, but get her phone number in front of, I don't know, like 6 people, I think it was. And it worked out in the end, and I'm glad I did it. It's the best decision I ever made, but it was very scary at the moment. So that's the story.
Beautiful story, which Jose and I are glad to be able to share with you, not just because we're fortunate that we found each other, but because it took action for that to happen, right?
Absolutely. And don't misinterpret what we are saying to you here. Some things in life are out of your control, and there's no action that can change that. And I guess that's where fate comes into play, if you believe in that. I know Adrienne and I believe in divine intervention and that God has a perfect plan for each of us. So in our story, the falling in love part was easy, but it was really my choice to create an opportunity through action that I really truly won my prize.
Awesome, I love it. Now, let's talk about attitude, shall we?
Yeah, attitude is something that we all struggle with, as we do with taking action. It's just human nature. No matter how good we've got it, we're unhappy sometimes. No matter how much abundance we have, we selfishly want more. But even though most people associate having a bad attitude to just, quote, being in a bad mood, let me actually give you an example of a bad attitude with deep seated roots. And I'm going to back this up with some data here. In 2011, Concordia University conducted a study about the effects of bitterness, which I would classify more as an attitude than an emotion. Now, the study concluded that it could reach a point where bitterness would make you physically ill, not to mention have psychological effects on you. Now, the doctor who led the study had about 15 years of relevant research under his belt. He also associated similar feelings such as anger, hostility, and other negative emotions to also be detrimental to your health.
Hmm, that's so sad. You know, that reminds me of many of the seniors that I look after when I work in that retirement home. As you may not know, I have a background in healthcare, and for years I look after seniors with all kinds of conditions like depression, Alzheimer's, and dementia.
Yeah, you're right, Adrian. And I remember we used to pray for those people because many of them were truly helpless. And why? Because at their stage in life, so their age, in other words, these illnesses were there by natural cause, right? But the difference with you and I is that we can either allow ourselves to be clouded by negativity or positivity. Now, whichever we choose will be directly reflected in our attitude. Now, I know in the network marketing industry or internet marketing, many of us have been burnt in the past with, for example, upline sponsors or mentors who haven't done enough to help us succeed, and that can kind of trigger you to yield yourself to things like bitterness. But guess what? There's a respected leader and an inspirational figure who recently passed away, and even though his funeral and burial was attended by about only 450 select dignitaries, it was actually reported that for his memorial service, there was an attendance of about 80,000 people. Now, this included about 90 world leaders. The funeral was reportedly larger than that of Princess Diana, Michael Jackson, and Pope John Paul II combined. And of course, we're talking about the former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is actually the perfect example to demonstrate how issues like bitterness can be overcome. Nelson Mandela was incarcerated for 27 years of his life. Now, he could have easily justified his bitterness and no one would have judged him. But to him, it wasn't an emotion that he had to just accept and learn to live with. He knew that it was an attitude and he made the choice to leave it behind, just like the quote says. And I'm going to read it to you here. It says, "As I walked out the door toward my freedom, I knew that if I did not leave all the anger, hatred, and bitterness behind, that I would still be in prison." So that's pretty powerful. Now, if you Google images on attitude, you're going to find some funny ones, but I did find one that makes a valid point as well, and that's this. A bad attitude is like a flat tire. If you don't change it, you won't go anywhere. And it really, really is true because simply put, attitude reflects leadership. So take a moment here just to think about how you express yourself on a daily basis and how others perceive you. Are you someone with a good attitude and a positive outlook on life? Are you an optimist? Do you try to see the good in people? Do you try to see the silver lining in every cloud? Now, hopefully the answer is yes, but if not, then you need to tune yourself up if you expect to succeed as an entrepreneur. But it goes beyond that. A positive attitude will help take you further not only in business, but in life altogether.
This is right. And I know it can be difficult at times, especially when life throws unpleasant surprises at you and things don't seem to be going your way. Just remember that your problems are simply an opportunity for you to showcase that amazing attitude you can have. I like to say, have an attitude of gratitude.
Yeah, I absolutely love that quote. It's very catchy, it rhymes, and it's totally life changing. And it doesn't just apply when things are going your way, but also when, life hands you lemons. Like the saying goes, when life hands you lemons, you make lemonade, right?
That's a funny one. But yeah, we could talk all day long about the importance of positive attitude and taking action. But we're going to move on to something a little different. Even that we've been teaching you to define yourself by looking inward, the next module will show you the two things you must do to define your business by looking outward.